In this section of the course, I will teach you how I color my characters. There are many ways to color your characters, but I chose a method that is very efficient and that it works for me, for my style. If you've seen some of my art, you've seen that I use some kind of cel shading style, which means basically using flat colors and one layer of shades at most. And most of the time I also use one layer of flat black shades. So if you like the style, you can follow me to learn how I do it. And even if you want to try something else, something different, I'm sure that the techniques that we are going to see in this course, in these lessons, are going to be very useful for you. To start with the coloring, as usual, the first thing we need to do is to create a new layer. We can do that using this button. This time we don't need a vector layer. Actually, we cannot paint in a vector layer, so we need a raster layer, okay? But this time we need the layer below the inking layer. Probably you can imagine why, but the reason is that if I try to paint like this, then I won't be able to see the line art that it took us so long to produce. So what I need to do is to drag this layer below the inking layer. This is much better, okay? So how can we paint? Well, one method that I do not recommend is to use the pen. You can just take the pen and manually paint your drawing, following these contours, following the silhouette of the character. But as you can imagine, this is very time consuming because you need to zoom in and then clean all these areas beyond the line art. And yeah, it can take a long time. It's not that nice because then if you want to paint this region, you have to go inside and be very careful. So of course you can do it like this. And actually some art techniques that mimic traditional art can only work this way. But for us, this is not the best way to do it. So let me delete the layer. I create another layer here. And let's use another tool instead. Let's use the paint bucket tool here, the fill tool. Here it is, okay? Again, we have a lot of parameters. We talk about them now, but basically what this does is it automatically paints any region delimited by pixels. For example, if I click here, I paint only this region. It doesn't go beyond these lines. So as you can imagine, this is very useful to quickly paint some areas much faster than if we were using the pen. So very easy. You just need to check the paint bucket tool, the fill tool here, and click the region you want to paint. Okay. Let's take a look at these parameters here. As you can imagine, if you choose refer only to editing layer, it won't work. And honestly, I never use this option because it doesn't work well with my style of painting. Let's see what happens if I click anywhere on the canvas. I painted the whole layer. Why? Because I am only working in the active layer. These lines here in this other layer don't count because I'm referring only to this layer. So that's why in this kind of projects, it's not very useful. So yeah, most of the time you want to keep this on, refer to other layers. This way, even if you are painting in this layer, which is empty, absolutely empty, it will still take as a reference the other visible layers. In this case, the inking layer, which is what we want to use as a reference. You have to be careful because if you have other layers on, let's imagine that we have also these layers, then they will also count. So the program, the software will detect these blue lines as part of the drawing. And we don't want that. So when we are painting, we have to be careful and we should have only the inking layer visible for this to work. The next tool is actually more useful. What this does is looking for an enclosed space and fill it with the color that you have selected. It's hard to explain, but basically this is what it does. Okay, so I just need to select the area outside my drawing and then it will fill it as long as it is an enclosed space. Okay, this is quite useful, but it doesn't do anything that we cannot do by ourselves. It's just faster. For the sake of practice, let me show you how you can do the same using the Auto Select tool, because I think this can be useful later. To achieve the same result, you can use the Auto Select tool and click outside your character. Okay, outside. So by doing this, you are selecting the outer area. Okay, then you can click this icon here, invert selected area, or use a shortcut. In my case is Ctrl-I. But when you click this, what happens is that you select the inner area. Okay, the inverted area. This way, if you choose a very big brush like this, you can quickly paint the silhouette of the character. Okay, so as you can see, I'm getting the same result. Then if I go back to the fill tool and I use the enclose and fill tool. Of course, the color will change according to the color that you have selected here. Okay, so if you want to go for a darker color or a completely different color, you just change, you select, and then it will automatically paint the figure for you. So you can use these two methods. You can use enclose and fill, when you can auto select, invert, and then fill by yourself. Both are very quick and both are good. But the main point of this is that you should get something like this. What I like to do when I'm painting is I like to paint the whole thing, the whole silhouette, with one color. What color? Usually I try to go for a dark color that is going to be used as a base for this character. For example, in this case, I could use this brown color. Let's see. Yes, something like this could work. I remember this man had a very tanned skin. I guess it's normal when you work every day under the sun of Greece. So yes, this could be a good start. Maybe now it's difficult to understand why I prefer starting with a base color like this instead of coloring each area one by one. Let me show you why. I think it will be easier to understand while we work on this character. So let's imagine that I don't start with this base color, so I start coloring all the regions on my own. So I select the fill tool, I make sure that I check this option, refer to all the layers, and then I start painting. Okay, so the first problem that you can see is that to paint just the face, I need to check all these spaces. Okay, before they were all filled already because the whole silhouette was filled. One way to avoid this problem is by reducing the close gap value, as we saw before. Because what's happening now is that the close gap value is very high, so the software somehow is understanding that this gap here, let me mark it with a different color so it will be easier for you to see. This gap here, maybe blue, this gap, it's counting as an enclosed space. Okay, it's too narrow, so the software is kind of understanding that this is an enclosed space. That's why it's not going beyond. This may seem annoying, but actually the software is helping us here. Let me use a different color. Here. Can you see? I did not close this space. I left it open. Can you see? But the software is helping me. It's trying to help me say, okay, you didn't close this, but I understand this is your art style, so maybe you don't want to close here, you don't want to bring the line up to this other line because you want it to be like that. And kind of the same here. You see, the software is trying to help me. It's trying to understand this as an enclosed space so it doesn't go beyond it. So, well, this close gap function can be helpful depending on your art style. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. But it's up to you to decide if you want to give a high value or a low value. Usually I give like a medium value and I deal with the mistakes on my own. So let's see what happens if I remove it completely and I paint. Okay, as you can see, all these gaps here don't count anymore, so it fills everything, but it also fills the eyes. So I will have to correct that on my own later, which is not a big problem. Okay, I will paint this. But when we paint this area, we can already see a small problem. You see, if I paint this gap here is so narrow that the paint can't go through. Okay, this is hard to explain, but you will see it happening very often. There are many ways to mitigate this with different options. For example, the first one is activating this option, fill up to vector path. When it says path, it means any of these strokes. Of course, you can only use this option if you are working with vectors here, but that's our case, so we're fine. Let's see what happens. Oh, much nicer. Can you see? Then the software automatically calculates the path to reach all the pixels created by the vector layer. Okay, I know it's hard to explain, but you will see the difference very quickly when you practice on your own. Let's try to do the same. Okay, as you can see, there are some white pixels here, but if I turn on the fill up to vector path, you see it's much better. So basically, if your line art is vectorial like this, there's no reason to not have this option on, fill up to vector path, because it will make your life easier. But let's imagine that you are working with a raster layer and for some reason you are getting these white pixels. Okay, these white pixels are very annoying. What can you do? Well, the first thing you can do, I guess, take the pen tool and go over them like this. You don't need to be very precise because you are working under your line art, so there's no problem. You're not going to destroy your outline or damage your inking layer. It's just a little bit time consuming, but sometimes there's no other way around it. That's why I think that using a dark base color can help not to prevent these white pixels from appearing from time to time, but to help them to go unnoticed. Because if these white pixels appear over a surface that it's dark, they won't be white pixels anymore. They will be dark pixels, and those are more difficult to spot. Again, this may sound confusing, but let me show you an example. Let's imagine that I started working with a base color like this one, a dark brown. And then I started painting the face with this tan skin color. It's the same color that I used before. I used the same techniques. I did not turn on the fill up to vector path, so I got those white pixels. But now these white pixels became dark brown pixels. So even if I don't see them, even if I don't fix this problem, it's hard to see. It's almost unnoticeable. But if I turn off this layer, you see the white pixels become very, very apparent. I can see them. Oops, sorry. Here, here, and here. Okay. So of course this is not a big problem, because unless you zoom in, it's difficult to see these problems, but I think it's worth to take these measures of precaution so these things don't happen and our work will look more professional. I also like using a dark color as a base because it helps me to see how the other colors interact with this more neutral background as opposed to this artificial white that it's not that helpful in my opinion. But at least take it as an insurance against white pixels if you want. Anyway, let's continue with the coloring process. So for now, let's focus on the skin tone, okay, that we started. If you want to recover this color of the skin tone, you have one option to get it very quickly. While you have selected the pen or the bucket tool, the fill tool, you can press Alt and then you will temporarily activate the eyedropper tool. Then you can click or you can keep it pressed and move around and you will sample all the colors on the canvas. Right now it's basically white, black, dark brown or brown like here. So I want to get this color. I select it, I release, and as you can see down here, Now this is my active color. So I can go back to the canvas and finish coloring my drawing. But before doing that, let's make sure that I have this fill up to vector path option. So I avoid these white pixels as much as possible. And let's make sure that we have this refer to multiple layers also active. Because if it's not active, we'll have the same problem that we had with this option here. It won't read the inking lines. So just let's see what happens. If I try to click here, it fills the whole image because it's not reading the inking as part of the image. Okay, it's only referring to this layer. So we always want to have this option activated. Okay, so let's continue and let's see what other problems we can find when we try to paint our character. For example, here I would assume that I have two regions, 1 and 2. Okay, so I should be able to fill this area by clicking here and here. Let's try. Oops, it didn't work. What happened here? Well, apparently there's something here preventing the paint to go to this region. What is that thing? Well, if I paint this, I will see that there's a very, very thin line here that it's counting as a separation. To fix this, we have two options. We can try to turn off the fill up to vector path, and yes, now it works. So the reason why the paint was not going there, it's because probably in the inking layer we cannot see, but there must be some kind of very, very thin vector line going down. Maybe it's some line that we deleted using the eraser, but there was a very, very thin line that survived. So when you see this happening to you, try to find out what happened. So first of all, try to turn off the fill up to vector path and see if it's fixed. Alternatively, you can use the pen tool to go over this gap and it will look nice. So as you can see, no matter how hard you try, sooner or later you will find these problems of white pixels or areas that do not connect. It happens, so you have to get used to it and know how to get rid of them. You see, here is kind of the same. I'm pretty sure that this is happening because when I drew this vector line and I deleted it, I left some remains there. I didn't clear it completely, so now it's interacting with the paint function because this paint function, this fill tool, is sensitive to vector paths. Okay, so when this happens, you can just turn it off for a moment and then turn it on again, or like I said before, you can just try to paint the two areas and fill the gap with the pen tool. Okay, I know it's a little bit annoying, but still this is much faster than trying to do everything by hand with the pen tool. And also in these cases, if you miss one of these spots or one of these white pixels or lines, it will be more difficult to notice if you have a darker background than if you have a white background, because then these white pixels or these lines will become very apparent. Let me show you one more trick. Okay, for example, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. Okay, if I want to paint this ear with the same color, I would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, this time we didn't encounter any of those ghost vector lines, so it worked. But still, we can do this faster. Okay, instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this software allows us to click in this area and then drag like that, and it will paint all the sections as long as they have the same color. So if I try to move out, it's not working. See, it won't paint this region because the color of this region, this white, is much different than this brown. You see, if I go back to the brown, I will paint it. Okay, so when you want to paint a lot of sections that are adjacent, you can just click in one of them and then drag. Okay, that's good. I think that's all the skin tone. here in our character. So now it's a good moment to talk about some decision that we have to make. As you can see, for now, I have the base color and the color, well, actually I could call this skin to make it more clear. And this layer is actually empty, so I'm going to delete it. Basically, I have two layers for my colors. This is good because then I can very quickly manipulate the colors independently. For example, if I want to change the skin color, I can press Ctrl U to open this panel. With this panel, I can change the hue, the saturation, and the luminosity of this layer very quickly. For example, I will try to go for a darker brown. Can you see? Maybe less saturated. And change the hue a little bit. Yeah, something like this. I will undo the changes so you can see the difference. Okay, this is very convenient, but the problem is that if we keep going this way, then we need to create a new layer, for example, for the hair. So I need to get a new color for the hair of the character. One tip that I can give you is that in order to keep the harmony of colors in your composition, in your illustration, one thing that I like to do is to use my own colors, the colors that I have already chosen, as a reference, as a base for the next ones. For example, instead of going here and choosing a random dark color for the hair, instead of going like this, what I like to do is to choose one of these colors, the darkest one in this case, and then move from it, okay? This can help you to maintain some harmony between the colors you choose. When you've chosen the color you want, you know what to do. We click in the area and we drag to paint all the areas that we want in this color. Okay, if you zoom in, you see that this paint is not going through these areas, so you just need to be careful. And also, we got one of these artifacts here too, but with the pen, we can fix it very quickly. I will paint the mustache like this. The trick that I showed you before about not clicking independently, just click and drag like this, is very helpful when you need to paint all these small areas, because sometimes it's difficult to hit them with the mouse, but this way you can easily reach them. You just need to hover over them and then you'll get them painted. Okay, good. So now I have the hair painted, but now let's say I want to paint the eyes. So I need another layer, for the eyes. Then I choose the white color just by using the eyedropper, pressing Alt, click in this white background, and then I try to paint this. But what happens if I try to paint this? What happens is that as this is not a closed area, the paint goes through these gaps. I can try to increase the close gap value to fix this. Okay, it's working pretty well. Or another thing that I can do is just try to close the space myself with the pen tool, and then I use the paint bucket tool. The problem if you do this is that, again, you get some artifacts when the areas connect. Okay, so you need to clear it, you need to clean it with your pen tool. Okay, and if you don't use it, if you don't use this method and you use the close gap, you may get artifacts at the other side of the line. So one way or another, most of the time you need to fix it with the pen tool. Okay, but it's not a big deal. Okay, now let's create another layer for the hat. And let's take a blue color. Again, I take one of my colors as a reference. I open the color panel and I will try to choose a color that is in this region. Okay, I don't like going to the right too much because these colors are very saturated, and choosing saturated colors can make your illustration difficult to look at. Too many colors, too bright, too saturated, are a little bit annoying. I think that it's better if you use less saturated colors, and maybe one color can be a little bit brighter or more saturated as an accent. But as you will see, most of the time I will use not very saturated colors within this region, okay? Or maybe even more to the left within this region here. So I press OK, I go to the head, and again, I'm doing only one click. I mean, I press with my digital pen and I keep it down. I'm holding the pen all the time. Okay, so I don't need to go through all these regions one by one. Just one click and then drag across all of them. If you zoom in, you will see we got another artifact here that we can clear. Okay, when I zoom in, I realized there's another artifact here in the hair layer. So I can go back to the hair layer, I can use the eyedrop to select the color and then go over it. But there's another way to select layers more easily, which is very convenient. By using the object tool. Okay, do you remember? It's been a while since we mentioned this tool, but it's a very useful tool. Here, I have it linked to my V key on my keyboard. By doing this, you automatically select any layer that you click on. Okay, so if I want to go to the eyes, I just click here. If I want to go to the head, I just click here. Okay, which makes it much easier and faster to navigate through our layers. So I think it's looking quite good now. Let me paint the eyes, the pupils. So again, I use the object to go to my eyes layer. Did you see what happened? If I click here, I select the base color layer, because actually the eyes layer is empty. The eyes layer is only this. Okay, I didn't paint the pupil, so this part is empty. It goes through the layer below, which is the base color layer. Okay, so to go to the eyes layer, I need to click here or just click here on the layer panel. Okay, let's paint some blue eyes. Okay, I think it looks quite similar. And maybe now what I need to do is to finish this beard here. So what I will do is I will create a new layer above the skin. I will call it, I don't know, facial hair. Okay, and what I will do is to manually close this line, something like this, and then I will use the fill tool to paint it. Okay, and then I will do the same here. So this is what we get. Okay, to add a little bit more of interest, I think I will add a secondary color here on the head, just another shade of blue. So I will take the same blue as reference and I will try to find, let's go for a lighter one. Let's see, to paint this lower part of the head. I'm getting some artifacts here. I guess it's because of the vector layers. So for now, I will deactivate this to make this easier. Okay, I think it's working better now. And I will turn it on again. That's it. What do you think? I think it's looking good for now. These are my base colors. I have all my colors in independent layers, which is very nice, but also it can be a little bit difficult to manage. At least for me, it gets a little bit difficult when I have many layers like this because it gets a little bit confusing. So what you can do to make things easier is just group them by creating a folder. We can call it base color. So all of them are here. Okay, so now it's easier to handle. But I will show you another way of selecting colors if for some reason, I don't know, by accident or just because you want to do it that way, you merge the colors in a single layer. I must confess that most of the time I work like that. I put all the colors in one single layer. Maybe it's just because I'm lazy and for me it's easier to handle as less layers as possible. But again, if for whatever reason you merge all your colors accidentally or you prefer working this way, There's one way in which you can still manipulate the colors individually. The easiest way to do that is with the Auto Select tool, and then you have to uncheck this box here, Apply to Connected Pixels Only, and use a low tolerance value. Then you click on any color, for example the skin, and you have selected all the skin tones. To check if we selected the right areas, I can press Ctrl C and V, and then I can check that I have created a new layer with only the skin tone. So I can very easily extract the colors that I want to manipulate. So if for some reason I want to change the skin tone, I can do this, then I press Ctrl U, and then as you will see, I only manipulate the skin tone. Okay, something like this. And then I can merge this layer back to the original group of layers. So they are all in one layer. As I said, it's more convenient for me, and as you saw right now, it's very easy to isolate the colors that you want to change, so you don't actually need to keep them in separate layers. But if you work this way, you need to be careful and you need to pay attention to the tolerance value. The tolerance value is the value that this software uses to decide if two colors are similar or not. The lower the value, the more strict this software will be when deciding if two colors are different. The higher the value, the more range of acceptance it will have when deciding if two colors are similar or not. For example, if I click here and I choose a value tolerance of 22, and I want to isolate the skin tone like I did before, I can click on the skin tone, but I can already see that I think too many things are selected. I can check if this is correct or not by pressing Ctrl C, Ctrl V to copy paste in a new layer. And then if I make this layer visible, I can see that it did not work very well because it also copied the facial hair area that I did not want. This happened because these two brown shades, these two brown colors are too similar. So let's undo this. I deselect, and then I will reduce this to a value of 5, for example. If I use value 5 and I select the skin tone, now it seems to be working better. We can check again by clicking Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I make this layer visible, and then as you can see, the facial hair is not there. Okay, so if you want to work this way with all the colors in one single layer, you can do it. I do it all the time, but just be aware of the tolerance value when you want to isolate any of these colors. Here you have two more examples. Two characters very different from our Greek sailor, drawn in two different styles, which can give you an idea of the results you can achieve by applying this technique to different drawing styles. As in all cases, I have used exactly the same tools and processes. It may be that for you, reaching this point is already enough. And in fact, there are exceptional artists who do not add shading to their drawings. A finish with flat colors is perfectly valid and can be considered as part of your personal style. So this was a very long lesson, but I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a lot from it. Now please feel free to take your time to adjust the colors of your character and try to isolate some colors from one single layer like I just did, just as a matter of practice, because this skill will be helpful later on. And then when you're ready, let's move on to the next lesson in which we'll learn how to shade our character so it will look much better.